I think we're good. You got them? Camera angle's good.
Testing.
All right. So what are we going first?
We do a
You wanna
15
talk
minute
about
Carl, that's
anxiety,
real
right?
quick. Oh, anxiety, yeah.
I have something on anxiety.
Let's
Okay.
go.
I was like, wait, it's like good.
We're on.
All right. Well, welcome to the Pursue podcast, Project Pursue.
Welcome
I'm
back.
here with Ant. I'm here with Jeremy. We got a good one for you today. We want to give a quick shout out to everyone who's putting this thing on. Quick shout out to Isaiah, who's behind the camera. Shout out to Jeremy for being here, being alive and well today. Shout out to Ant for being well, alive, wearing his nice fear of God. How we're God-fearing men here. And thankful to Jesus that we're here.
Amen.
Jeremy, anything?
Yeah. I think tonight wanted to talk about anxiety, right? Correct. And kind of just like, I think that right now we're living in a culture of anxiety altogether, where skepticism is so pervasive and at an all-time high. I think right now, not just church people, but I think people in general are anxious.
Right.
So I think tonight we just kind of wanted to jump on this podcast and talk about how to combat that and what that means to be a believer and yet be human and still go through the day-to-day things that give us anxiety. I think I have a couple perspectives from students, some things that I've seen over the last year that cause, like I said, anxiety. And so one of the things I was tripping out about this year, we had to read this book, and I kind of mentioned the book last time. Shout out to the book title, Generation Z Unfiltered. But one of the chapters in that book also talked about anxiety. One of the things that I thought was really interesting was how they said that for many students nowadays, for many people, they think that the more that they do, the more value that they'll have. So like, for example, like a lot of parents, they'll put their kids in multiple sports or multiple activities because they think that they're giving them what they didn't have, right? Because I mean, like, let's be honest, at least for me growing up, I'm considered a millennial kid. I was born in 1993. Shout out to 93 babies.
Hey, okay.
But one of the things that
What is considered millennial actually?
I think
What's the age group? I forgot. What
I
the age
want to
group is.
say it's like
97, right?
No, it's before that. I want to say it's 80, anywhere from 84, like and up. That's what I want to say is considered millennial. Gen X is, I want to say, like before that, like 70s.
Let's look at that real quick.
You can look it up, but I want to
I'll
say
get back to
that,
it.
yeah, the millennial generation is the next generation. The ones that like are in high school right now, that's Generation Z currently.
Okay.
And then after that, it's Generation Alpha. So that's going to be like my kids.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Yeah, Generation Alpha.
Alphas.
Yeah,
Yeah,
where they're
it's
only growing up
actually,
in a digital age only. Like, this is all they know, so to speak.
That's crazy.
So millennials are born from 1982 to 1994.
Okay, so I just made the cut. I just made the cut. 1993.
1993.
But it's true because I've
Yeah,
told
you're there.
people when we're talking about that, about the millennial generation and stuff, like especially 90s kids, like I don't really consider myself a 90s kid because by the time I was already going to school and stuff, the 90s was already like the early 2000s. By the time I was like first grade for me was 2000. I think 2001, something like that. So, I mean, by that time you're 7 years old, you're kind of conscious of some type of culture, whether if you see it on TV or whatever the case is. But like, but true 90s kids, I feel like remember, you know, the old Nintendo, the old Game Boy, that kind of thing.
Heck
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's true.
yeah, but no, like I was saying though, like with the millennial generation, like I think it's crazy because with these new Gen Zers, my generation believes that the more that we give them, the more opportunities that they'll have, or to be able to find something that they enjoy and like. But what happens is that kids wind up, especially nowadays, like I said, where where anxiety is at an all-time high,
Yeah.
kids are starting to become overwhelmed
Yeah.
with the fact that they have so many
Too
things
much.
going on, and it just winds up being too much. And I got to get my grades right, and I got to get everything going, and I have to. When I join a sport, I've got to perform at a certain level because parents are paying for this. For me to play basketball, what is it? Travel basketball, AAU, that kind of thing. And they're putting all this money out. So I need to perform at a certain level. And it just can give this sense of anxiety. But if you think about it, I feel like nowadays too, like it's just, I feel like our culture is focused on anxiety.
Yeah, I agree.
Like I feel like our culture is very much I guess the right way to say it is that it facilitates a place in your mind and in your heart to be anxious just because of what's going on.
Right.
Like I feel like it just facilitates that.
Do you feel? Can I just ask you another question? Do you feel like anxiety? Because you said about the kids how they do multiple sports. Do you feel like some of that anxiety also comes from expectation from parents?
Yeah.
Because yeah, I mean, I want to do good in my sports, but also my parents expect me to be good at every single thing. You know what I'm
Or
saying?
like school too, you know what I mean?
School
Like
too, yeah.
you could be like in programs and stuff like that, like academically, like, hey, I got to have good grades in English, have good grades in math. I think like sometimes in America, we think that like success is doing a lot. Like you're saying, right? Like anxiety can be found in our younger generation now because like we have parents who, maybe didn't have the privilege to do these types of things when they were young. It was like when you get home, you're cleaning the house, you're doing this, you're getting a job. Like, yo, I'm in second grade. Like, you're getting a job, you're mowing the lawns. Like, this is what you have to do.
When you're 18, you get
And
out the house.
and it's crazy because like anxiety right now, we see it in our younger students and even just adults, right?
Yeah.
I work at the bank. And it feels like everyone comes in, like they're just like, oh my God, I got to pay these bills. I got to do this. Oh my God, did you hear about the banks crashing down? Like, yo, calm down. Like, you know what I mean? And I wish I could tell them, like, just have you prayed today? Like, do you know who Jesus is? Like, like I wish I could tell them that. But you see that in our younger generation and on social media, they have to constantly be like everybody else.
Yeah.
Like, and
That's
just
so
to
good.
add to that, I mean, we see it everywhere. Like and also a quick shout out to today is May, right? May 2nd. And it's Mental Health Awareness Month too. So we definitely, if you're watching this, like, and you're going through that right now, we want to give a shout out to those who, who've conquered through it and are going through it as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like too, like we just came out of a literal like global anxiety. We literally just came out of, I don't know what to word. That's why I stopped after I said anxiety. But like the whole world was in a state of anxiety the last couple years, and so like do you think that that's like affected how now the generations to come, how they live now? You know what I'm saying? Like does that now affect like my life now going forward? Because I feel like now, ever since we experienced the pandemic with COVID-19 and everything, like now people are still more anxious than ever before, worried about illness, worried about sickness, whatever the case. I still see people walking around with masks, if you're sick, wear a mask. Before, if you got sick, you're just sick, you stay home. You're like, or you know what I'm saying? So do you feel like that has caused us to be more anxious?
Yeah, I think it has for sure. I remember when everything happened with COVID. It's crazy. I think that obviously it snuck up on the entire world, this thing.
Right.
But I think that for me, I can remember very distinctly, like, because I was about to get married that year. And I remember we were planning the wedding. And in the process of planning it, I can just remember Amber and I had to make so many changes, like time and time again, because of certain venues that wouldn't let us do certain things. Like we wanted to have dancing and to enjoy certain things, and we couldn't do those things.
So it limited you to do the dancing too.
Yeah, it limited us to in certain counties because we wanted to get married down south, and it just wasn't working out. So it finally got to the point where like, you know what, let's just save all our money and start our life and do the month-long honeymoon. And so we decided to do that, which was fun. But I think that like I just said earlier, I think that all this culture now facilitates a certain level of anxiety for all of us now. And I think if we're going to thrive and survive in this culture, I think we always, like I've always said, have to have a good like foundation in God, understand what his word says, because although things change and circumstances change, like Hebrews says, he never changes. Right?
He's the same.
So obviously like anxiety is connected to change, and change is uncomfortable. Things that happen that are out of my control, that brings a certain level of anxiety.
Right.
Things I worry about are typically things that I can't control. That brings on a level of anxiety. And so I think the call to action for us is to really look into God's word and see what he says about being anxious, see what he says about how to respond to when we're feeling anxious. So I did a study 2 weeks ago out of the book of Philippians, and I had to read the whole book, which isn't a very long book. It's like 4 chapters.
Yeah,
but I had to read the whole. I had to read the whole thing, break down verse by verse to write a paper while I'm studying for my master's. But I just thought it was really interesting, so I thought I would bring it tonight. But first thing is that Philippians was written, it's obviously a letter to the church of Philippi from the Apostle Paul while he's in prison in Rome. And when he writes this, they consider it to be about 61 to 62 AD, so after death, somewhere in that time. And Philippi was full of retired soldiers, and it was known for like Roman patriotism. So when Paul first went to Philippi on his second missionary journey, he would have faced a lot of resistance there, which he did while he was spreading the gospel message. And the only reason why he went there in the first place to Philippi was because he got a vision. In Acts 16, it tells the story of how he had this vision while he was going into Macedonia. And as he was going, he had this vision of this man asking for help in Macedonia. So he goes there, and he winds up just right there on the border of Macedonia, seeing Philippi, like right there. So he gets led into there. Now, what's interesting about his letter to the church of Philippi than the other letters, like the Colossians or the Galatians, is that the other letters that we read, he's actually writing to them in a moment of crisis. Like the Galatians, he's writing to them about, don't be preaching, that faith comes by works. Faith is in, that justification comes by your works. Justification can only come by faith in Christ alone. Or like based off their teaching, or like the church of Colossae was like, they were just out of control. You know what I'm saying? They were living one way during the week and then a different way on Sunday. They were kind of in and out, so to speak, one foot in, 1 foot out of their faith. But the church of Philippi, when we read this letter, there's an artistry to the way that he breaks down the gospel message to them. And the reason he does it is because the church of Philippi is actually thriving. They're a church of people, of believers that are obviously facing persecution themselves, but yet there's so much unity there. So Paul is speaking to them with adoration and love, and they're one of the only churches too during his time that went on and that actually supported him during his ministry. So what happens is this is the verse that everybody pretty much reads from here and that everybody looks at, is Philippians chapter 4 verse 4 through 7. It says here, "Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near." And here's verse 6. This is where everybody kind of looks at this. If you, I'm sure if you've been in church long enough, you've read this verse. "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, give thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." And so when he writes all this stuff to them, I feel like when he talks about bringing prayer and petition and bringing your requests to God, I think that like it's very elementary. Obviously we want to pray about the stuff that makes us anxious, want to go to God about those things, right? But at the same time, I love how it says, "and the peace of God which transcends all understanding." Like he's saying, this is this is how God responds when you bring these things to him. And the reason he brings this up is because just a couple of verses before that, in the beginning of chapter 4, he's talking about how there's these two women in the church, and they're actually going through some strife. There's actually an argument that's taking place in the church right now. And Paul's saying, don't let all this stuff that's going on that's making you guys anxious, don't let this take you off course from what God is doing here in the church and what God is doing right now in this generation. Like he's saying, don't let all this cloud your judgment. And he invites them into this peace that surpasses all understanding, right? And so like, got to understand that this whole letter that he writes to them, it actually got to them late too, because the guy that wrote the letter to them, he got sick on his way over there. And he actually got so sick he almost dies trying to get the letter to them. And so in the end, the Bible says that throughout this letter, as Paul's talking, he's saying like, look, like this message that I've sent to you, this letter, like somebody almost died taking it to you. Timothy has dedicated his life to you, right? To you and to spreading this gospel message, just to doing all these things. And basically what he's saying is, even though like he himself is in prison, I love how there's like a paradoxical flow to this whole entire letter too, because basically he talks about how his prison has become a palace for other people. Like how in his prison, like even though he's himself being persecuted, that through that he's able to see the fruit in the church of Philippi and places where there is unity and unification of Christ. So it's a beautiful, beautiful letter. But the reason why I bring it up is because in chapter 4, even though we read that, what it's a call to action of more than anything is for us as believers to live by example. To live in the example of what God is doing and what God can do.
Right.
And how our hardships, the stuff that we do go through, how it actually builds a platform for others to see, like, even though we're human, even though we battle, even though we go through things, when I give those things to God, this is the result. This is what God can do with this platform that was built off my hardships, off the stuff that makes me anxious, off the stuff that worries me. When I give those things to God, he builds a platform for me to stand on and say, I'm still standing because of him and because of what he's doing. And I can give honor and glory to him, right? And that's why, like I said, the end of chapter, or the middle of chapter 4, I love when he talks about how I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.
Right.
He's saying, though, in that passage, he's not just talking about like anything I can accomplish all things. He's saying I can get through all things.
Yes.
You know, with Christ who strengthens me. So makes me think about anxiety, makes me think about the stuff that worries us or gives us or keeps us up at night, right? The idea of it is that when I have the strength of God, I have that peace that surpasses all understanding. He allows me to walk through things that would actually make others give up. Like I trip out with Christians. I've said this before, that like for me growing up, right, in church, all my life, I would see Christians come to God and serve the Lord, and then they go through something difficult and they actually go through a storm. And you don't see them, or they give up, or whatever the case is. But I've also seen those Christians who, at the same time, are going through hell. Right. Literally going through hell, whether if it be sickness, whether if it be financial issues, whatever that thing might be, whether if it might be relational issues at home between the family, and they're in church, man, and they're praising God. And they look like everything's okay. And see, when I was growing up, I used to think that the reason for them being that way was because, oh, well, they're kind of being fake about it. It's like they're being fake about what they're really going through. Or church is an scapegoat. It's like, this is my escape place for me to escape reality of what's really going on. But that's not what it was. Like people in my grandfather's day and in the elders' days, like what it was they were able to find peace and they were able to rejoice even through difficult circumstances. Right. So it's like, basically I would break it down like this. Yeah, I'm going through hell, but I'm praising God that I don't look like the hell that I'm going through right now. Right. That's what it is. And that's what being able to get through all things through Christ, which strengthens me, is all about. It's saying like the stuff that would make others give up is still keeping me going. It's still allowing God to build a platform for me. So that's just something I saw in Paul's letter, and there's so much more in there, but like for the sake of time, like for me, like I said, like when you're talking about anxiety, to me, Philippians is probably the best place to go to understand like what it means to be under pressure and yet still be surrendering to what God is doing, surrendering to his will, surrendering to his authority in your life.
Yeah. And I want to take a step further with that letter to Paul, from Paul. Philippians 4:8-9, it says, "Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned from me, received or heard from me, or seen in me, put it to practice, and God's peace, the God of peace, will be with you." And something that I took away is maybe the thoughts that you think determine the direction of your life. Maybe that the thoughts that you think to yourself. And Paul says, he says, think these things. and then what? Put it to practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, if you think about good things in your life, surround yourself with good influences, good people.
Right.
Think about those things. Put it to practice. The thing is if you submit to God's will, you'll experience God's way. You know what I'm saying? So,
Yeah.
And here we're learning, we're seeing that Paul's telling them, like, if you just do this, if you just think good thoughts, you know, like, and I feel like too, like there's so much lies in this world that tell you that you're nothing, that you can't, that you disqualify. And the funny thing is that more than people will disqualify you, you'll disqualify you from certain things, you know. And so that's why I think it's very important that the thoughts we think about ourselves and how we you know, what we put into our lives, what we put into our minds, you know.
It's true.
And so that letter was because I was reading that.
Yeah. Well, it's
and I
crazy
was going to talk about that today.
because I love, so like, and that's why I said, like, I can't obviously take the whole time to break down the letter,
Right, we'll
but
be
the
here all
whole
night.
letter itself is basically like what. So I'll give you an example. What you just read right now, verse 9, when he says, like, whatever you've learned from me. When he says whatever you've learned from me, he's not talking about just about ministry stuff. He's talking about his circumstance.
Yeah.
Right.
Like them seeing him going through persecution, them seeing him beat,
Like how
them seeing him
yeah.
him imprisoned, like whatever, like, and he's saying what you've learned from me, like from my what you've learned from my situation. And I think that I think that we have to kind of start to, especially in living in 2023, is to start to see that this Bible, like what we're living by, we've seen a lot of what it's about, but there are still things that have yet to come, things that God is still yet to do, that have been prophesied in the New Testament. Like, we ain't seen nothing yet, when we're reading this thing.
Yeah.
So when you think of it like that, and from that perspective, it kind of changes your expectation of what's to come. And so when he says there, he's saying, like, whatever you've learned from me, he's talking about his situation, him being in prison. And so it makes me think about you, makes me think about me, about the people that walk out in this faith, people that are ministers or influencers of this faith, and how this platform, this life that we're living, is actually a platform for God's dwelling, for
Right.
God to do something in our lives. And what it does, it builds a platform so then people can be like, yo, I've gone through what they're talking about, or I'm going through that right now, whatever that he or she is talking about.
Yeah.
And so what happened with the Philippian church, he's saying, whatever you've learned from me, like, he wants them to see his situation and to see it through his perspective in this letter.
Yeah.
To see it that way changes your whole entire perspective of what God is doing and what God can do and what God will do.
Yeah.
And so I think that when we live our lives for Christ, we need to understand someone is always watching.
Yeah.
Right.
Someone is always watching how you respond to negativity, how you respond to anxiety, how you respond to depression, how you respond to conflict, right? In ministry or at your workplace, at your job or at your school or wherever it is. People are always watching, right?
And it's true too, because what came to my mind as we're talking about this, and just to break this down, like, Paul's in prison, right? And he knows where the presence of God is. And when you deal with mental health, anxiety, depression, all these things, these negative thoughts, right? You were talking about too, right? The thoughts that Paul's telling us, the thoughts that God gives us, practice, put it to work. Sometimes people don't, like, they don't know, right? They don't know how to come to Jesus. They think that they have to be a certain way. The church is coming to Paul. Paul's in prison. And he's writing to a church who's supposed to be, he's writing to people who are free as far as physical, like, they're free, right? And sometimes what mental health can do to people is to make them feel like they're in prison, make them feel like there's no way out. And I want you to know something right now. Anxiety, it starts with anxiety, but anxiety has friends. Anxiety has these other things that come to play with it if you don't understand that it's important that we give these things to the Lord. It's important that we give these things to God. I tell people all the time, people who are churched and unchurched, is stop worrying about something. Give it to God. Because the more that you worry about it, the more that you're holding on to that pain, whatever it is, it's going to lead to something else. And that anxiety is going to lead to suicide. And that anxiety is going to lead to a downhill, to drugs, to alcohol, or to other things that were never meant for you in the first place. And I feel like even for me, like if I've always questioned myself, man, like what does anxiety feel like? And this was crazy because I've never really felt anxiety. Like I felt like pressure. Don't get me wrong. Like I felt like, yeah, stress. You know, I mean, I got plenty of gray hair, so obviously I stressed. You know what I mean? But like I know how to take that to God. I know how to get in my prayer closet and really worship and pray. But what's crazy is one day I was taking this test, and it was like a state test, and I really had to pass it. Money was involved, like career wise on the thing. And right when I clicked the start button, I just got like a crazy wave of anxiety. Like I've never been through this. Like I've driven through fog, I've driven through rain, I've driven through crazy things, and been through crazy storms and trials and stuff like that. But here I am, and I'm worried now, and I'm anxious, and I'm sweating, and I'm stuck in this place, and I feel like I can't move. I feel like I'm chained to something. And I remember leaving that place defeated because I didn't get the results that I wanted. And in life, you feel that way. You don't get the results that you wanted.
Yeah.
You don't. You're not where other people are. You're not doing this. You're worrying about everybody else so much. And then God spoke to me. He said, son, that's not who I called you to be. That's not who I define you to be. Like, don't hang your head low. Like, the reason why you were struggling during that whole test is because not once did you believe in yourself. You believed that everything was just gonna, you know, everything was gonna be the way you thought it was going to be. And I don't know why, but I feel like sometimes in life we're trying to build our own platform. We're trying to plan our own plans. We're trying to do this. And there's nothing wrong with that, being organized, creating an agenda, you know, staying on top of things. But sometimes when you don't get your way, sometimes God has to show you, son, I have a better way. Like even though that didn't happen for you, but that doesn't mean you give up and you quit and you go to these other things. Like I says, anxiety has friends. You don't go down this road of hanging your head low and feeling like there's no tomorrow. Like there's a God that can work in any way. Like in your failures, in your success, right? Where you're at right now, even if you have $1 million in your bank account or you don't, God just wants you to continue to allow him to build that platform. Keep him on that platform. Because the more that you're trying to build it and you're trying to get to this place, what happens is you're building up anxiety, you're building up pressure, you're building up, and there's no presence. There's no presence. And I remember just walking out there and I said, God, even though I didn't get the results, come on, I still got you. I could still just sitting there on that bench. I remember I was in San Jose. I was sitting on that bench, and I just feel his presence come over me, and you get a little emotional, you know, because you feel God's presence. But I'll tell you what, guys, weight was lifted off my shoulders, and I felt like telling to somebody who's maybe lost somebody, or you know, whatever, you lost your job or whatever it is in life, like build your platform and let God be it. Let God be that platform. Build everything so God can be that platform for you in your life, because he's got better plans. He's got a better way. I mean, come on. Paul is encouraging people in prison. In reality, he's a prisoner. In his mind, come on, he's doing the work for the Lord. You know, he's not just a prisoner. No, he's free in his mind. He's free and he's preaching freedom to people. And that's what I'm saying. Like, it doesn't matter like what you go through in your life. Like, don't let that define that, because the moment you do is you really ruin an opportunity for God or to see where God is in your life. You know, and for those who don't know God, like, give it to him. Give it to him, because it's so much better when we give our issues, our problems, our stress, our every little thing to him. Is it easier said than done? Yes. You know, and maybe we could talk about that real quick. Like, what, you know, as far as reading the word, but it's really important, right, that we seek his presence. Especially when it comes to these things.
It is. And the thing is, I just had an experience, and I'll continue exactly with that. I had an experience with a young man. He pulled me aside the other day, and he was kind of letting me know that and it was crazy, because when he looked at me, he kind of looked at me a little crazy, you know, like I thought he was going to punch me or something. And I was like, oh, shoot, a little bit scared. And I was like, and I looked at him back in his eyes, and I was like, and I can tell something was wrong, you know? And so we had a conversation, and more or less what he told me was, hey, I have a perspective on people, and I have thoughts that I think about people. And this is exactly what he told me. And he said, and I don't like it. And what I feel for people, and what I feel Paul was trying to tell people is, you have the ability to change your thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, you can change what you think. You know, be encouraged to don't be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. You know, so we have the ability to change the way that we think simply by, you know, like Ant said, filling yourself with God's presence.
Yeah.
You're busy. You're too busy talking to Chat GPT, and you're looking for Chat GPT for answers, but nobody wants to come to Jesus for answers.
Wow.
You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Wow, come on now.
So, and that's what I'm saying. Like people rather go to an AI robot, try to
Come
get the
on,
answers that I
man.
need. But what
Yeah.
about Jesus? He got all the answers. The word is right here. And so, but the world needs God's presence more than ever.
100%.
Hey, thank you so much for tuning into our Project Pursue podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. You want to stay connected and you don't want to miss a single podcast again. Listen, we have these podcasts coming out every other Tuesday, so stay tuned for the next one. We want to let you know that we appreciate you, and we want to open the opportunity for someone to be able to give to this ministry. As this ministry, we produce and we create content, and that cannot happen without your guys' support. So we're going to list a Venmo into the description, and we want you guys to really give what's on your heart. It could be $1, it could be $2. I don't care, as long as you guys give to this ministry. This ministry would not be able to happen without your support. We love you. We thank you. See you next time.